I wanted to write about the Ice Age. I wanted to immerse people in that kind of ancient environment and that ancient time, and use archaeology to build a world that then a story could unfold in. And the story itself was inspired by recent revelations from ancient genetics.
Seems like you have plenty on your plate. Why did you decide, which is what we're here to talk about, to write your first children's book, Wolf Road?
I'd kind of dabbled with bits of fiction in previous books, and I've written lots of factual books which are generally about the human body or about archaeology and genetics. So I've written a series of books that I'm just finished the last one in a series of 3 actually, which are about bringing together archaeology and genetics to really interrogate the past. And I've written just little bits of fiction within those, where I've allowed myself to go off on flights of fancy. And in one particular book where I was writing about domesticated animals, including dogs, I'd allowed myself to go off on a bit of a fictional flight of fantasy about the first wolf that was domesticated, because we know that dogs have come from European grey wolves. And of course you want to imagine what that was like.
So tell us a little bit more about the story then. What's going on in this novel?
I don't know how much to tell you about it, because I don't want to spill all the beans.
But who are we telling the story of?
We're telling the story of a 12-year-old girl called Tuuli, and she is at that stage in her life where she's very self-assured, she's very competent, she's a very good hunter. So she lives in a group of people in a small tribe, and the rhythm of their life is that they are migrating every year along a river valley from inland, where they live in cave shelters, rock shelters, and then they move down the river valley, and they're largely following this great herd of reindeer that kind of comes together and migrates in the spring. And so the book is about her and her tribe setting off on this annual journey that they always make in the spring, stopping off to fish for some salmon on the way, and then eventually ending up at the summer camp, which is at an estuary close to the sea. But along the way, things happen which really surprise her. So there's a surprise meeting. So she kind of thinks she's got it all figured out. She understands how her tribe works. As I said, she's really good at hunting. She can look after herself. She's very capable. And she thinks she knows everything about the world, pretty much. And then she meets somebody who makes her think, oh my goodness, the world is much stranger and bigger than I imagined.
What are these recent discoveries that you mentioned that kind of inspired you to start writing?
The recent discoveries come from ancient genetics, and they show us that modern humans, so our own species, Homo sapiens, came into contact with other groups of humans. So people who are human, who are still the same genus as us, but a bit different. So Neanderthals in particular. So we know that when modern human hunters first came into Europe and into the Near East as well, that they made contact with Neanderthals. And in 2010 we had the first paper which showed absolutely that Neanderthals and modern humans had come into contact with each other, and that there had been interbreeding between those groups. So those two groups had mixed together, and we've all got a bit of Neanderthal DNA in us.
It's one of those moments that you feel like you wish you could have been there to see more about it. And I guess the only thing you can imagine it into fiction and bring it to life that way.
A lot of the time when we imagine what these scenarios might have been like in the past, we often frame them in terms of adults. And I thought, actually, I want it to be young people. I want that first contact between modern humans and Neanderthals to be through the eyes of young people. I think they'll react differently. Yeah.
Was this a lockdown project? When did you begin it?
I began it ages ago, probably about 5 years ago. I'd started to write it, and I'd written about a third of the book. And then I was busy with other projects, other books, and very much put it on the back burner, but I wanted to return to it. And then 2 years ago, I decided that I would, and wrote the rest of the book.
And how did you find it, writing fiction? How much of a challenge was it?
It was really interesting. I dabbled with fiction before, writing very short pieces, imagining, for instance, the first dogs that were domesticated, or the first wolves that sort of approached humans and were likely to become domesticated. And also the first horses as well, because I thought that must be teenagers jumping on the backs of wild horses. I mean, who else would do this crazy thing? But writing a whole book was a completely different kettle of fish. I found it really difficult, but I found it really interesting. It didn't, having done quite a bit of writing, it just felt to me like a completely different medium. The way that I wrote it involved a lot of research to begin with, and I was constantly researching both the environment and the culture from an archaeological perspective. So all of the objects in the book, all of the making, that's all based on actual archaeology and anthropology. And I put a lot of that in place and put the environment in place before I released my characters in it to see what they would do.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that, because I think that although there's so much knowledge in this book, I think it wears the research really lightly. Like the story is kind of paramount to keep you reading through it. Was it difficult to hold yourself back from just sort of pouring in the historical knowledge that you have about this period?
I'm really pleased that you said it's light, because it's in there.
But it's not at the front.
It's not at the front,
back,
no,
yeah.
Because it's just part of her life. So you know, when she's making stone tools, or when she's fixing her hunting gear, all of that kind of thing, it's part of what she's doing on an everyday basis. So I suppose if you had a modern novel, you'd be talking about objects in the same way. So it's not like, here's the science bit. Yeah. It's just part of everyday life for her. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I just wanted to bring that world alive, so that you're not just looking at objects in museums, but you're actually thinking about what it would have been like to live and to be a hunter in those times. Yeah. The research, I suppose, is based on both archaeological objects, archaeological finds. There's a scene where they're entering a cave, and there's a strange circle of stalagmites, for instance, on the floor, and that's a real archaeological site.
Where is that?
That's in the south of France, Brunekel Cave in the south of France. I've been really lucky to spend quite a bit of time in the Arctic, living with reindeer herders, and at various times of the year as well. So I've been out to northern Siberia in winter when it's minus 40 degrees. And learned about how people survive in those kind of what seem to us to be extreme environments, but which to the reindeer herders of the Arctic are just that's just what you do. I remember turning up in the Arctic with these really fantastic polar explorer boots, and the reindeer herders basically saying, "We're not going to take you further north unless you put reindeer fur boots on, because those boots are rubbish. The reindeer fur boots are much better." And you kind of go, really? And you put the reindeer fur boots on and go, oh my God, they're right. Yeah. And they're just superb. I mean, reindeer know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I was able to bring some of my own kind of personal experiences, having been to the Arctic, having spent time with Nenets people, Evenki people, and bring that to bear as well on, trying to kind of recreate that ancient way of life. Yeah.
One thing I really loved in the book is how your main character, Tuuli, how her dad has a different perspective to the other people in the tribe. Like he sees humans as different to animals. He wants to try and make the next better tool rather than keeping things the way that they always have been.
I think throughout human history, and prehistory, you see innovations occurring. And of course, we're very unlikely archaeologically to pick up the first time that somebody's thought of a particular thing. By the time we start to see it archaeologically, it's probably an idea that's quite embedded. And there are some ideas that kind of come and go and, might disappear for a bit and then come back again. But for instance, he's experimenting with how to throw a spear further. And he's thinking about how he can do that and maybe something that lengthens his arm. So he comes up with this idea of a dart thrower or a spear thrower. And we know that these were, starting to be made in the Upper Paleolithic. And it would have been quite a big leap in terms of technology, because you can throw once you've extended your arm. It's a bit, if you haven't used a spear thrower, I think the easiest way to think about it is those ball chuckers that you can get for dogs, and how much further you can throw a ball with a ball chucker than you can just with your hand. Yeah. And it's a similar kind of thing. So the speed and the distance is transformative. So yeah, he's constantly going, how can I improve things? And then there's other men in the tribe who are going, just leave things as they are. We've got this stuff, it works. And of course we see that today with modern technology as well. There's always that kind of push-pull between going, actually, you know, we think the technology's fine, we don't need to push it any further. And then other people going, let's innovate.
Yeah. What do you think, in terms of archaeology and anthropology, what do you think about the government's sort of attack on so-called softer subjects?
You know, from my own perspective, I originally studied medicine, which is a discipline which contains obviously a lot of science in it, but has a lot of the humanities in it in some ways as well. And archaeology, I think, is an incredible discipline because it does completely bridge between the humanities and the sciences. And I think that both are impoverished without the other. And I think our universities will be impoverished if we lose our humanities subjects. And there's always pressure in terms of attracting students to particular courses. But you know, to then have a top-down idea about which courses you're going to offer, I think is very difficult. Yeah.
From your perspective, what have your studies of past societies told you about modern society and how to solve its problems?
I think largely studying the past and looking at how humans have responded to big challenges gives me grounds for optimism. I think that it shows me that we are flexible and adaptable. We can develop technologies. I think the big issue is going to be how well we work together globally, because we kind of have those capabilities, but we need to be able to tackle that on a global scale, and we need to make sure that people aren't left behind. And I think that one of the things over the last few years, which has given me enormous grounds for hope, has been the scientific response to COVID. As far as science was concerned, we saw an incredible response where it rose above national boundaries. It became a truly kind of supranational response to this enormous challenge. The speedy development of that vaccine, for me, is more impressive than putting a rover on Mars. It was just incredible what could be done when we put the resources there.
If we put our minds to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our money.
And our money, yeah.
Where our minds are, yeah.
So Wolf Road is just out. What's next?
So I've just finished another book, which I think is going to be published next spring, which follows on in my series of archaeology and genetics, burial archaeology, looking at what ancient human remains can tell us about the past. So I wrote one about prehistory called Ancestors, one about the first millennium, so a lot of Romans, Anglo-Saxons and Vikings in it, which was called Buried. And then this latest one is called Crypt, so it is ABC. And it's about mostly about diseases, death, diseases and violence in the Middle Ages. And also an update on the 1,000 Ancient Genomes project, in particular Dr. Pooja Swali, she's just become a doctor, who's been working on disease genomes, so metagenomes within that project. So I talked about the inception of that project in Ancestors, and I'm able to kind of bring some of those updates into Crypt, including, I think I can say because it's been published now, evidence of Bronze Age plague in Britain, which is just incredible.
Excellent. So that's next spring.
Yes.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for coming to chat, Alice, and good luck with Wolf Road.
Thank you very much.